Welcome, fellow designers, to another episode of Design MBA, which is a real life MBA program for designers, where designers like me and you can learn the skills and mindset to launch our own business venture. And today I have a phenomenal guest on the show whose name is Alen Faljic. I hope I did not butcher his last name. So, who is Alen? Alen graduated from a business school and learned design when he joined IDEO as a business designer. At IDEO, he consulted Fortune 500 companies on designing business models, strategy, pricing, etc. Then he started d.MBA as a response to the huge gap between the worlds of business and design. Pretty much both the worlds are speaking in different languages. And today, he's a founder and CEO of d.MBA to help designers gain business confidence. And they have had over 300 alumni students in 50 plus countries with a 97% completion rate. Let's take a pause. So, if you are a designer that's wondering, how can I learn the business fundamentals to grow in my career? You need to right now head to d.MBA. That's D for dog, d.MBA. There you go. That's it. d.MBA. Go there and definitely check out their 6-week online part-time business course that's going to help you level up your business skills so that you can have a bigger impact on your company and grow in your career. Once again, it's d.MBA. So without further ado, Alen, welcome to the show, man.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
I got to tell you, man, you are one of my inspirations. When I embarked on the podcast journey, you already had a podcast, d.MBA. So I remember listening to a bunch of episodes and I'm like, man, I'm going to do it. And I ended up kind of like just copying you with a different name, Design MBA.
It's perfect. I mean, it's the more effort and more energy and more attention we can bring to this topic, I think the better, because it's just a systemic change or systemic issue in the design community that we have to, work on.
So I'm kind of just trying to like put myself in your shoes and kind of like rewind back the time. Mm-hmm. You are a business designer at IDEO, something that a lot of designers in the world think that's like the best you can get. Me, like you've got it, you're there. And then how did you get this idea for d.MBA? And more specifically, did you like start saving for that? Like, oh, I'm going to quit my job and do this. I need to start saving up.
Yeah, good question. I kind of always felt the want and the need to try something, to try to build my own venture. And as a business designer, if you think about UX designer, or maybe a better analogy would be a brand designer, right? Like creating a brand guidelines or a logo is your basically like creation, right? So as a business designer, one way you can express yourself is creating a venture, creating a company. So in a sense, for me, it's kind of a work of art or design, right? So like, can I design a beautiful venture, right? So beautiful is not usually what we company or think or say when we talk about companies, but as a business designer, I mean, there's just a way, the same way you can make write a beautiful code, you can create a beautiful business model, beautiful system, operations, and just like a company that works beautifully. And that was always kind of somewhere in my, on my to-do list and my long-term goals. So when you work as a consultant, you kind of help others try to do that, which is great. But a lot of the times you don't get to call all the shots, especially the details that are so important. So after some time you just feel like, okay, just to get this creative freedom, I want to try and do everything from zero. And that was kind of the moment where I decided to go on my own and try. Actually, d.MBA was one of the ideas that I worked on at the time. I didn't want to put all the eggs in one basket. So I had a few other ideas and I tested them systematically and rigorously to get to the one that felt connected to what I wanted to spend my time on and also what was a good business opportunity at the end of the day. And with regards to getting ready for the step, it wasn't easy. I don't know who said it, but I think Nassim Taleb talks about 3 biggest, not vices, but
the addictions. Yeah.
So it, right? So one of them is the salary.
Yeah.
The 3 biggest. What are the other 2? Sugar.
I think it was like sugar, heroin, and then like a steady paycheck.
And a steady paycheck, exactly. And that's true. So, but since I had this at the back of my mind that I want to start this, I
Hmm.
started saving from the first day. I started
Oh
putting money
wow.
aside that I would have enough. I wanted to build like a runway of 2 years. That
Hmm.
felt like okay, if I have enough for 2 years, I hoped I don't need 2 years, but
Hmm.
I knew I probably need 2 years of savings to feel safe.
Yeah.
Because probably once you get down to 6 months or 3 months, that's when you
Yeah.
get so nervous that you start making all the mistakes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was the journey.
With the 2 year runway that you were starting to save up, was the planning that in the 2 years that it's going to take you to build a business, you're going to be starting to draw money from that pool to kind of like, fund your daily expenses? Or were you going to have a freelance gig to fund all that?
I didn't have a clear plan. I just had a feeling that if I have enough, I'll find a way. And if not, I'll just find another job.
Okay.
So there was no clear plan. I think if I remember correctly, I jumped into it thinking that hopefully I can get cash flow positive venture in 6 months, which didn't
Okay.
happen. So I did start taking some gigs on the side. But then hopefully, not hopefully, but luckily in roughly 12 to 16, no, in roughly 10 months, it started going in the right direction. And then I
Hmm.
was lucky enough that the Bitcoin market exploded. So I could also get another another 6 to 12 months of runway there. And that's kind of
Oh
what helped the
God.
whole thing.
So the d.MBA started off on a really successful Bitcoin bet.
Partially, yeah.
So when you left your last day at IDEO, did you take your idea or did you already have a prototype of it ready? Did you like do like a free course of it with a few test students or your friends?
I know where you're going with the question, so I'll answer it differently. So I think you have two kinds of people, right? You have people who need to have all the security to make the jump into
Yeah.
starting a venture. And they have the bandwidth to actually work on multiple things. Like you can have a job, plus you can do something on the side.
Hmm.
So I'm not one of those people. I cannot work on
Oh.
2 or 3 things at the same time with the same energy and the same creative energy. So for me, the step of leaving a steady job was necessary to get creative and to even get to prototypes. So I had a few ideas. Like I always had this notebook with my ideas,
Hmm.
and I just knew that once I would have enough time, I would start prototyping those. So I didn't have the proper concept. I just had like areas
Hmm.
of topics that I were interested in and problems that I were fascinated by. And one of the biggest ones, were definitely the problem of education in general.
Hmm.
Just like how, you know, if you look at all the technology, how much it's advancing, and then you look at
Yeah.
education, how much is still being the same and just behind
Yeah.
our time. That was one aspect, and the second was also one of the problems that I noticed when I was at the agency, which is just the huge gap between the business
Hmm.
and design communities. So after that, you just need some time for these things to kind of click and get into the right time, to get into the right spot. Another thing that really helped me was, I think, one of the crucial questions that really helped me get to this venture and to this project was, what project am I willing to work on for the rest of my life?
Okay.
So, and this is not to say I will work on this for the rest of my life. I
Hmm.
mean, hopefully, maybe, yes. But I feel like you have, as somebody who is very much into entrepreneurship, you get drawn to these ideas, which feel like great business ideas,
Yeah.
but don't really fulfill you. So
Hmm.
this question was like a filter to
Hmm.
find the ideas that are worth even pursuing for me personally.
Okay. Wow. I think I definitely relate to what you said about it. Like, I know the conventional wisdom is that, oh, keep your day job and leverage it to launch your side hustle. And then one point when the income becomes like cash flow positive, then you can make the full time jump. But as a creative person, I agree with that. Like, I did launch the podcast while I was still working in corporate America. But I think a lot of the growth and lessons I learned kind of happened once I like left it, because then I could focus on it like full throttle. I didn't have to worry about like managing the meeting with the manager and then trying to like do an interview with you. So I definitely saw that difference, just trying to able to harness that. So initially, when you started d.MBA, it's just you, right? There's no employees or anything like that. It's just you teaching the courses.
Yeah, it's just me,
Wow.
just trying to figure out if it makes sense or not. Yeah.
And you talk about this term where you say micro community classes. So before we jump into what that is, according to you, and why you go there, a lot of people would have just thought that, hey, why don't I just make this video about or course on what business fundamentals designers need to learn, put it on Udemy, an existing platform, and sell it, or sell it on your website. So what made you go in this kind of model of having a cohort with like live interaction versus just prepackaged content that you can just scale?
I think it's a combination of two things. One is if you really want to build like a great product, you go really deep into understanding what makes a great product. So one of the most important question was, how can with this education program, how can I really have an impact? Because I was inspired by my negative consequence with a lot of online courses where you take an online course on Udemy or even something else, and then you don't even usually finish it because there is no interaction and etc. And like that didn't feel right. So it was this wish to create something that would be really impactful and beautiful. And at the same time, also just the experience of working on design agency means that you're asking these right questions, like what is really important? How does the experience need to look like? So what you start doing is, I mean, as a business person, you a lot of the times you just copy what is already there and just put one
Yeah.
spin on top of it. You don't really go into questioning the whys. And I think
Yes.
as a designer, you really question the whys. Why am I doing this? Why is this
Yeah.
important? Why is this important for this person? And I think this was kind of the process that led me to just creating something different. So it was, as you know, a lot of interviews, prototypes, getting feedback from people. And that kind of developed into the way that it did. I didn't know that this will lead to mix or micro community courses. I just knew that we probably need a different format for online courses, right? So actually, funny thing is that the first thing I did was I created an email course. So it was like a collection of 40 something emails, which the idea and the value proposition was that, like you would just get over 40 days, 40 emails teaching you 40
Yeah.
frameworks and tools that are important for designers about the business. Like business tools you can use in your workflow, the language you can use with meetings to get more confidence, to get buy-in from senior stakeholders, etc. That actually got a pretty positive response from the listeners of the podcast and from the email subscribers. I was really happy with, like, on the business side with the response. With I think 40 people out of 400 on my email list bought at the time, and I
Oh,
was like,
wow.
wow, okay, and like it was a huge success.
So it was a paid email course.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
And
wow.
I intentionally set the high price just to see actually if this is a problem worth solving also for the people, right? So I think the price for these 40 emails was, I believe, $100.
Okay.
And I can talk about that later, but why I set that price. But so going into that, I said, okay, if I get at least 30 people, I will do it. So then I get 40, perfect. Okay, let's do it. And I spend the next 4 or 5 months writing the content out for that emails.
Oh, so you had not already designed the content. I thought you had already written all those 40 posts and then sold the course, but it was the other way around.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things you as a designer always try to do, but also as a business person, is just reduce the risk, right?
Yeah.
So my prototype was, I sent an email to my 400 email subscribers and told them, look, I want to do this full time. Are you willing to support me? So I would spend the next 3-4 months writing this. If you're up for it, here's the Gumroad link. Please,
Wow.
support me. And yeah, I was, as I said, positively surprised by the support. And then I spent those 4 or 5 months writing this out. And then this insight came that, while everything looked great on the surface, so people bought and they were initially happy and interacting with the product, usually the interaction would stop in day 7 or day 10 of this email course. At the end of each email, I wrote there, if you have any questions, just reach out to me.
Yeah.
And people reached out, they had questions, and I was very happy to go into the discussion. But then that stopped around day 10 of 40-day email course.
Yeah.
And that felt weird. So I dug into that a little bit and just learned that they didn't really do anything with those emails. They were almost seen as infotainment. I read something, but I don't necessarily am planning
Yeah.
to use it. And that's when I started really deeply exploring that it's not about the content that we provide, it's also how you provide it, accountability, like learn by doing, and all of these nuggets that now go into the MBA were
Hmm.
discovered. Yeah.
And could you also say that maybe the cost was also a factor? Like when I think about all the courses that I've bought online, you think about Udemy, Skillshare, or the email courses, the cost has always been marginal, meaning it's like 50, $100. So, I mean, there's an investment, but it's more of like, even if I don't follow up, it's not like an actual degree where you've spent thousands of dollars where there's this impetus that I've got to finish it because I put a lot of money into it.
There's definitely that, right? So, I mean, education is mostly about psychology. It's
Hmm.
finding the right levers to pull to really change somebody, right? So, just the human psychology is to do more with the information that you have worked hard to get. And that can either
Yeah.
be paying more, or it can also be, going through the process of actually reading the book versus just notes. Have you ever seen this? Like if you just read a note or a short article, you're much less likely to use that information than if you actually read a whole book, you know?
Yes. Yes. It's so true.
So there are a lot of these small things that go into that. So yeah, one of them is definitely having, so for us in the d.MBA, a big part of it is just the application process where we really try to filter for the main thing for us, which is motivation. Is
Hmm.
somebody really motivated to join the program? Because that's the main thing that will make the difference between you using this, actually using it, or just seeing it as something that's not an important, maybe interesting, but then you won't really use it.
And I've noticed like a couple of things where you've applied the psychology you were talking about, the human psychology, to work and benefit the student that takes part in d.MBA. One of the things I noticed that you actually have a start and end date. So it's not just like keep going at, like your own pace and you can finish whenever. So that was one thing I noticed. Second thing I also noticed is that there's no like concept of like pre-packaged videos that you just watch. There's a very like live classes they have to attend. And then I think the third one on my research I was noticing is that like you can only get, I believe, like one or two times like an extension on a deadline for submitting the assignment. But if you just say, "Oh, I was busy," then there's a penalty for that, just like you would have in an actual college or university. If you don't submit on time, I mean, you get penalized for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about accountability, right? So let's start with this. Yeah, so we call it the two wild cards rule. Basically, within the 6 weeks, so it's very predictable calendar that we have for the students,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you join, you have signed up for a program that has very specific dates. Like we do this on this date, we have a call, then there's a deadline, so you know what you're getting yourself into, right? So we ask students to do this, to make this commitment beforehand, because it's not a commitment to themselves, it's also a commitment to everybody else who's in the course, because the
Mm-hmm.
course is limited to 30 people. So, and a lot of the value comes from the fact that you're not alone. There's
Mm-hmm.
29 other students who bring their own perspective, so you discuss with them. So you can just imagine how bad the experience would be if you had like only 15 people showing up and doing the work. Like it would probably just deteriorate every week. So we really put a lot of emphasis on the fact that, like you should be honest with us and with yourself if you want to join.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we also have the wildcard rule. And we are very much, we almost use it as a filter. So we tell everybody in the application call, look, we have this thing called the wildcard rules, and it works like this. And then what we pay very close attention to is how do they react. So there are two reactions usually. One is people get really, really excited about it. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, amazing. I know everybody else will be committed to it. Or you get a nice response of, oh, okay, I didn't know that. That sounds like it's a big commitment. I'll think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you kind of through that can also filter who.
And you don't hear back from those people, the ones who say, "I'll think about it."
Now, some people actually think about it and they say, oh, actually, that's a great idea. So yeah, I'm up for it. And some people just say no. And that's perfect, right? So it's not for them.
Yeah.
Maybe they need a different way of learning, which is also
Yeah.
great. So we can also like recommend them business books that they can go through, and they can also learn the other way. So yeah, that's one way. It's these like accountability within the course. I think also what's important is, and you touched upon that, is the predictability, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a start date and there's an end date. And paradoxically, because we're so busy, it's easier to fit a course into your calendar
Yeah.
if you know exactly when will it happen.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the online education companies are selling how is it called?
Work at your own pace. Yeah.
Yeah, at your own pace. They sell it as a feature, where in reality, for most of us, it's a bug, right? So it's a bug because it means we don't have the accountability, we don't have the
Yeah.
predictability to actually go and follow through the course. So actually, the very first version of the d.MBA was 8 weeks long,
Hmm.
and none of these rules were there, right? So like
And was it also online, the first version?
everything was online from the get-go.
Why did you do that instead of in person?
Well, for me, I think there is a lot of. I found the challenge of trying to figure out how to do online education much more interesting for me personally.
Hmm.
So I just tried to figure out that problem because I think it hasn't been solved yet. Whereas in person, I think education there's like a much clearer model what to do there.
Hmm.
So yeah, I was personally more interested in that, and I also feel like there is a lot of advantages that the in person can't give you, right? So like in
Hmm.
d.MBA, you have people from around the world getting together, so it's like a lot of perspectives, etc. But yeah, to go back to the very first version, so it was actually just I believe 9 or 10 students in the very first
Yeah.
intake. And yeah, it was 8 weeks long. And I remember we had none of these rules. There was no wildcard rule. There was
Hmm.
no accountability. And what happened is just people didn't follow through. So out of
Oh.
those 10, I think only 6, if I remember correctly, finished, right? So that's
Hmm.
like 60% completion rate.
Yeah.
And you would think that if you have only 10 students, you could be much more personal with them and
Yeah.
it's going to work much better. But now we have like, hundreds of students and then 97% of them go through the course. So, this predictability and accountability is super important to help us work with our psychology.
But one could argue that if you've got 100 students and they've already paid you the money, and let's say you don't focus on the completion rates, how does that hurt the business? Because one could just argue that, well, you got the money, you just keep on churning the machine, getting more students in. So how does the completion rate actually impact the business in the long run?
Yeah. I mean, so I think the very first thing is to talk about why did you even start a company, right?
Yeah.
So as I said before, for me, it really wasn't about creating the fastest paced startup with the highest profit margin and all of that stuff. Because
Hmm.
yeah, that's the path you would take there, right? It's just like you charged up front, so you don't care about
Yeah.
the long lasting impact. But I think what we try to do with the d.MBA is to make it an example of how the business should be run, which is much more long term thinking versus short term thinking, long term KPIs, long term story. And our philosophy, and just like also just common sense tells you that if you do a great job with your product and actually have an impact with students over the long term, this will just create a more long lasting impact and hopefully also have the impact on the business. So it may not be the fastest growing
Hmm.
business, and it doesn't even have to be. But on the long term, if you have results, there's going to be something that sticks,
Yeah.
that creates a different type of story. And usually, the stories that we see, they have been built around for a long time. And there is this there's something more than just creating a business that churns money. And that's what we are just as people also drawn to.
And maybe that's why you've been just a bootstrap business compared to raising buttloads of venture capital money.
This is a great way or segue to to that question, right? How do you fund your business? So again, if you think about it from business design perspective, getting or not getting funding is one of the fundamental questions because
Yeah.
in the very moment you take money, you have made a decision that your product is not your product anymore, but your product is your company. You
Yeah.
have made a promise to somebody to sell your company, right? So fundamentally, you have to go back to why did you start a business? So in our case, again, the mission of the MBA on our website says like to show that companies can be run more thoughtfully and still be successful in the business sense. So
Hmm.
the thoughtful is like the really important part. And now, if we really want to work on that mission, taking a VC money, which means all of a sudden the investor becomes your most important stakeholder,
Yeah.
is not really going to help you do that. So for us, we really try to put the emphasis on our most important stakeholder as a student,
Hmm.
plus the environment, the broader society. right? And when you think about it this way, you see that actually taking VC money would work against the very thing that you try to create. So that's why we are bootstrapped and just working with different pace, yeah, more sustainable pace. We call it thoughtfully scaling.
Mm-hmm.
So how can we thoughtfully scale the business to still provide impact on scale, like so the more students can join the course, but we don't want to sacrifice the quality, because one of the easiest ways you can scale the online education is to
Yeah.
just get rid of all the features that add value. So one of them is like having mentors, giving feedback, having
Yeah.
discussions, right? So that's the usual model of the open online courses, where
Yeah.
content is there and you just go through it. Yeah, so that's definitely much more scalable. But scalable for what? Scalable for short-term revenue, but not for long-term impact.
Ah, I see your point. But as you think about thoughtfully scaling, do you see yourself still involved in teaching all the courses, or do you see yourself also bringing industry mentors and then having them take the lead, where you're kind of like focusing more on what are the next steps for d.MBA?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so initially, a lot of the brand was built around. So I was the one in the podcast hosting. I was writing
Mm-hmm.
all the articles, all of that. So at one point, the question I had was, is the value proposition based around me as a person, or is it something else? So, and I think that's a stage that many companies also, or especially of this type, hit. And we just decided to prototype it out, and to see if it's really
Mm-hmm.
just the person or if it's more. And through a few experiments, we figured out that it's not about just one person, in this case me, but it's more about just like actually the value of the educational experience goes up with the diversity, right? So what we are doing right now is we're bringing, as you said, industry experts. So in our
Mm-hmm.
case, we're focusing on business designers,
Mm-hmm.
because they are in a very unique position to have the knowledge in both perspectives. Because teaching designers about businesses is it's much more about mindset and really understanding the challenges the
Yeah.
designers have than about just, hey, here is the business concept and here's how you use it.
Yeah.
It's much more about how you talk about it. And there are a few people who are in the right position, and those are usually business designers. So yeah, we work with business designers to bring them in as mentors. While one may think that having more people may make it worse, actually in our case it worked for the better, because as we discussed before, it's a community, micro community
Mm-hmm.
course. So actually having like more mentors, it's more perspectives, it's more experiences. You can have
Mm-hmm.
experts in more specific topics. Now, the way it works for us is that I'm still involved mainly in creating the content and curriculum, just because I
Mm-hmm.
just truly enjoy taking complicated concepts of business
Yeah.
and distilling them down to very core fundamental ideas. And that just takes time also for a lot of our mentors who are full-time employed in consultancies. So they
Mm-hmm.
come in, like on to for interactivity in the course, but
Mm-hmm.
I still do a lot of the lectures.
Now, you've got some really like, badass mentors coming in from the industry. Like you've got Daniel Borka there. So how does one successfully pitch like people of these kind of caliber to come in and share their knowledge with your cohort? Because it's not just about money, like, oh, because people in this position, they already make money from their day job, so it's not about money. So how do you successfully get them to come on, but also make the commitment known to them, like, hey, if you're signing up for this, you might have to come like so and so time at so many days, because they also have a busy schedule. So how did you navigate those two points?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think a big part of that is just building those relationships over time and having a strong point of view of what you're working on. And then you're looking basically, if you stick with a certain topic, if you're interested in this topic enough, you will stick with it for long enough to figure out who else in the community is interested in it.
I
And
see.
especially in your case, I think what you're asking is, how did you get the person X, right? So it's
Yes.
maybe sometimes we take the wrong approach of finding or going after the person X that we think will be great. But I think it's much more
Yeah.
about just showing up and doing the work and see who maybe starts interacting with you. And
Oh.
I think if you have a certain story that's interesting to tell, you will have those moments where you get a certain connection with somebody, or maybe somebody can introduce to somebody else. That's how these connections come about. And I think then it's important just to, to have the understanding of what they're looking for, to talk to them, and then just, you know, talk about it. So in our case, Daniel Burka is not coming into the course like regularly. We
Yeah.
recorded a guest lecture with him. So that's a bit different, but we do have mentors who come regularly, right? So, and then we basically, speaking now from the business model perspective, they're like freelancers that we hire for coming into the course. And we do stay in touch with them in the like on our Slack, in the alumni Slack. Yeah, but that's kind of the model that we have.
Now, I really resonated with what you just said there. Is if you pick a topic that's of interest to you and you stick around long enough, you're doing work, there's going to be other people that reach out to you because they like the work that you're doing. So I'm wondering, are there any names that come to mind or stories where you can just think of the top of your head where you're just doing the d.MBA stuff you're doing and people reached out to you, maybe mentors that have worked with you or other people just because of the work you were doing? It was more of like an inbound stuff instead of you kind of like going and pitching to them.
I don't have like one of those stories where a founder of it's not one of those stories where a founder of a huge company writes to you or something like that. It was more that maybe when there was like a Twitter conversation about a certain topic, somebody asks about, hey, where is the best place for designers to learn business? And then one of our students mentions the MBA. And actually the question was posted by a well-known person in the community. And that's maybe your way in of like starting to be part of that conversation. And I think what will be interesting also to you personally is the fact that podcast is a great way to build those relationships.
Yeah.
Right. So there are like those nuggets of relationships that could happen. And I found podcasts to be a great way to invite those people to have a conversation with, because I think usually in those like 45 to 60 minutes, you can get the sense for if a person is really interested in the story or is just interested to come up on the podcast and speak. And that's a nice filter also to see who may be a good person to get on board with your work.
I couldn't agree more. Like some of the amazing relationships I've been able to build with the podcast, it's just insane. Like it opens doors. But one other personal filter that I've done is everyone that I've reached out to has on some level inspired me. So for me, it's never been about, I got to fill up the roster list for, like this many guests and stuff. It's always been like, well, I see, I like what work Alen is doing. So then I'll be persistent about following up with you. And it may not pan out, like for whatever so XYZ reason, but there's got to be this innate drive for me to learn more from you. And I already got a bunch of wisdom along the way. Like there are some nuggets, but then I have to tell my mind that, hey, you can listen to this again, but right now focus on what he's saying. Because like my mind will be still like stuck on that nugget. And I'm like, okay, got to come back to the present.
Yeah. And I think what also podcast gives you is like the confidence, right? So actually, in addition to the MBA, I have another podcast which I recorded locally in my home country, which is Slovenia. And I basically decided to focus just on Slovenia because I felt like I had a better chance to talk to the top entrepreneurs from Slovenia versus going after the big, the names that everybody knows.
Yeah.
But I still got the same impact, which is I needed those conversations to just understand how they're running, how they made, like, for example, when you asked me before, how did I make the step of, actually not having a job and starting a venture? A big part of that was also hosting that podcast, where one of the very frequent questions in the first 10, 20 episodes was, how did you make the step, right? And I see you also doing the same thing now. So
wow.
I mean, that kind of helps you, right?
Wait, so the Slovenia podcast came before the d.MBA podcast, what you're saying?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Damn. So it's like almost I'm learning from you is that if I keep on interviewing all these design hustlers, sooner or later, I'll like draw enough data points to do my own thing. I like that.
If you think about it, like podcast is a great way to do user research or expert research, right? So, and I think the person that takes the most out of the podcast is not the listener, it's usually the host. So even if you're not interested in growing the audience per se, what is definitely very important is it's a learning experience for you, because you will be the most engaged and you will just remember the conversations the most. And then there's a red thread. And after like when you hit usually 30 plus, that's where you kind of start seeing, like really tangible results.
Man, I'm just like beating myself up that I did not have this chat with you maybe in like Feb of this year, because that would have definitely helped me take a look at the bigger perspective. Because a lot of the things you're saying, I couldn't put it to words, but I had a feeling for it. But now what you're saying is it's so true because the podcast market was so crowded and it still is. So I always thought to myself, like, screw the vanity metrics. The reason I got into the podcast game is just to learn from people, as I would say, doing my actual MBA instead of going to an Ivy League and paying $200,000. This seems to be a better way of doing it.
Definitely. Yeah.
My God, dude. I'm still like trying to like come back from all like this amazing wisdom that I've gotten. So one of the things I wanted to talk about was, because I also had the same issue, is, so let me first describe. So you started out with Beyond Users was your main website, and then within that subset was the d.MBA. Then you did the whole rebrand of the website, and now everything is d.MBA, d.MBA. And I love the new design, by the way. Amazing design. So
Thanks.
doesn't a part of you kind of wish that you had done this from day one? Like, why not just have d.MBA the way you did it now from day one, instead of having to like work through different iterations and finally stumble upon that?
I think we wouldn't have gotten there if we didn't start, right? So I think that's kind of a normal approach. And as designers, we beat ourselves too much on, like these small decisions in the beginning. Like, what is the name going to be? What is the domain name going to be? What is the visual? And all of that stuff. And it's definitely important, but for most of the ideas, it's not crucial. I think you can just start. You can just start with something, because the first 2 years are usually the exploration of the directional certainty. When you're starting, like when I started, I didn't have a philosophy for what the MBA is. So even if I tried to create the brand, I wouldn't know exactly what I wanted to say. So I would have to probably just change it. So having a very bland brand in the beginning, which Beyond Users was, actually helped, right? So because there wasn't a lot of emotion in there, it was just very professional, but it didn't say much, right? Apart maybe from the name, which was a little bit more playful. But then you start seeing where you're going, and you then want to communicate that visually. But now, as a business designer, I would also say that sometimes, I would say usually you don't need to start with a brand, but sometimes for certain ideas, brand market fit is more important than the product market fit. Like if I'm building a product that already exists, in other words, the technology for the product is pretty much ubiquitous. In this case, and let's say that I'm targeting a very specific niche within the market, and I think my brand is my value proposition, then yes, then you can start with a brand. But in this case, you don't need to work on the product right away. But in my case, the biggest value proposition was not the brand. It was the value proposition of teaching designers about business. So yeah, I didn't spend that much time on the brand itself.
Wow. And now that you're more involved in the curriculum and designing the course, how frequently do you keep on updating it? And another question to that is, how do you update your knowledge to figure out that, oh, I read about this needs to go actually in the syllabus and update it?
So basically it's being updated all the time. After each intake, after each cohort of the MBA, we have a very rigorous process of getting feedback. So we're doing that right now. So there's a student survey, there's student interviews, there's mentor interviews, mentor survey, and especially looking at what has happened during the course. Like you have certain stuff, certain data points that people give you, and then you can just go and look what has been done, how people have worked on certain case studies and assignments. So yeah, we use these sources of data, so a little bit qualitative, a little bit quantitative, to make changes. So the content is being changed all the time. So during the last 3 years, there was one major update and there were plenty smaller updates, right? The major update maybe looks like it may be every 2 to 3 years. And the smaller ones are like in between, where you're just like, fine tuning certain things. Now, how you get ideas for what to change? Oh, that's actually a pretty tough question, because there is no process, but just the fact that we work with the students long term gives us the long term view of what content they're really using and how they're using it. So then you see, oh, actually, we need to change how we talk about this, or we need to change this tool because it's not being used. And since we're reading business books, business articles, and talking to business designers around the world all the time. We know what are the things that are being developed. And we're using all of that knowledge also on the d.MBA itself, which is the meta level that I really like. And then through that, you kind of realize what are the tools you have to change and adopt in the course, right?
Got it. So then how are you spending your time between the curriculum, content design, then also running the podcast, and then obviously overseeing the whole business?
Yeah, I think we're still learning that, how to do that. But one of the things that I think we do pretty well is like we have mornings just for individual work, and
Mm-hmm.
then afternoons are more for meetings. So
Mm-hmm.
that gives me personally some time to work on content in the morning, right? Because you need long uninterrupted just to crank something out. And like when I was creating now the new version for the curriculum, that was a process of 3 4 4 months, highly
Mm-hmm.
painful process of just trying to fine tune all the details and make the story work, and also finding ways to explain these things. And it just meant that I put a lot of the other things on the side. So you can probably see that also there was a gap in when the last podcast was
Yeah.
published, right? So that's just what happens if you're a small team. But yeah, once I'm out of that funk, then usually we just try to have certain okay, now is the time after the course. So this is like the synthesis time.
Yeah.
After that, I go into the content creation time. That's for me. Maybe for the somebody else in the team, it's something else. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like finding seasons within the year, and then within the
Ah.
day, finding the individual versus group work dynamic.
Oh my God, dude. I love the analogies you're coming up with. What I ended up doing was I think after your interview, I have one more I mean, in this month, I have one more interview, two more. And after that, so by end of November, I'm gonna have all the interviews done for 2021.
Wow, it's great.
So I was like, now I can, like that is done. I can, like you said, with the seasons, now I can focus on the season, which is to kind of like launch my blog and share some thoughts that I've been having and not have to worry about, oh, gotta do an interview.
Yeah, there's something about batching that's really
Yeah.
important. So I also thought about having like a content week where I would just maybe get together with a team and we would create 5 6 episodes. I would write 2 3 things, and then yeah, you would have that on your like back burner
Yeah.
if you need it, because there's always stuff coming up. But then just having like a steady pace of things coming out, I think is really important. That's a great approach.
Well, thanks so much, man. What advice would you give to a business designer who's looking to start their own venture at some point? Like, if going back, like, what is advice you would tell yourself? And I know it's one of the cliche questions, but sometimes some of the insight that comes out of this is really amazing.
Yeah, it really depends who I would talk to. To most, I mean, the different, like, yeah, they're really different tips. I mean,
Yeah.
psychologically, I think it really depends on the type of person you are, as we said before, versus just jump and do it, or, try
Mm-hmm.
to do things on the side. I think one of the biggest, or the tips that may be applicable to most people is just think small. I think when you're starting, you really want to think big and like, oh, how can I make this as big as possible,
Yeah.
as soon as possible? And this
Yes.
is so counterproductive for so many reasons. I mean, the first of them is just the fact that I think when you're starting out, I call this giving yourself candies regularly, right? So when you're starting with your own venture, what is really important is that you need to keep yourself motivated above everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are creating something that takes a very long time to get feedback, you will just need to be much more motivated than if you create a path for yourself where you can get these candies along the way. And I think in the
Mm-hmm.
beginning, my approach is you need to get that candy in the first 2 weeks of you having an idea. And then maybe you
Mm-hmm.
can wait for the next candy like 4 to 6 weeks. And then you can wait for 3 months and so on. So like when you have an idea, you should do something with it in 2 weeks, because if you're waiting for more, you're probably waiting too long. Of course, there are
Yeah.
certain ideas where you need more time. Like if you're building a rocket ship, yes, you can't do it this week.
Yeah.
But if you for most of the ideas that our generation has, like there is a way to prototype it much faster. There's so much great off the shelf software that you can use that it's just a crime not to use it. Like for example, when like my very first experiment for the the d.MBA was actually an email that I sent out to, I believe it was 10 or maybe 8 of my former colleagues at IDEO. And I
Mm-hmm.
sent them an email asking them, hey, I'm thinking of doing something around business education for designers. Would you be interested in me sending you an email next week from Monday to Friday each day, teaching you one thing about business?
Mm-hmm.
And all of them said yes. And this was actually not the metric I looked at. The metric was actually hidden. So my metric was, will they tell anyone else about it?
Ah.
And will this list grow without me telling them that? And luckily, by the end of that next week, I think the list grew from 10 to 40 or 50 people, something like that. It was
Mm-hmm.
way more than I expected. And that was kind of the first candy that I needed. Like, oh, okay, it makes sense to, move forward with this.
Yeah.
So break down your idea to really small as possible step and just try to get it candy as soon as possible so you can move on, because also your idea will change so much in the process that you should just do the single smallest thing possible with it.
I love that, man. I'm gonna keep that candy metaphor in my head, trying to get like those small candies.
Because I see so many friends who give up on their ideas just because their first experiment is too big.
Yeah. Or it's like too ambitious. Like, and I'm just like thinking about some of the things that come to my life. Like even with the podcasting, there was like all these like articles, you should buy this gear and that gear, and then you make it more complex. You got to have this like pro setup, and it kind of like intimidates you. Like, I don't know how to operate this. But like the reality was just like, just get a decent mic and stuff and just go out to one decent guest that your friend, and just do one interview. And like you said, that was like the first candy. And like my version of getting that candy was, here in the US, a lot of us shop at Costco.
Mhm.
So my buddy took me for shopping for Costco, and then the employee that works there, I just asked him that, hey, what if I did this podcast? What do you think about it? So I had the name for it called the 99% effort
Mhm.
before it became 99% design. Then it evolved into Design MBA. So that was like the first testing I did. And this one quick story I remember was my buddy drives a sports car, the Corvette. So it's a very fancy and very speedy car. And I said, I know, but dude, I'm so late to the game. Like, there's like this Tim Ferriss and like Alen and all these people who have done it, and I'm so behind. So what he did is he took his car and he started speeding. And then because he's got a very quick sports car, you can just like zigzag your way through. And then we got out of that traffic, and then there was clear road. So he said that no matter what market you enter into, there's always going to be competition. But if you find your way in your brand, you will eventually get out of that crowded noise and make your own place. So something about that philosophically motivated me to like keep going.
Yeah, that's a good friend.
Oh, thanks, man. And
Maybe also this reminds me of another thing that's important is when you're creating an idea, I think what really helped me is to think in categories, right? So try
mhm,
to, as you said yourself, like when you have so much competition, like I think it's easy to get stuck on the fact that there is a lot of competition in podcasting. But if you
mhm,
find the category that you feel like you can be strong at and you can own, I think that's kind of a good approach. Like whenever you have an idea, even before testing it, try to design this idea to the extent that you have like a very special point of view on the idea, right?
mhm,
There is something about it, like because one of the how I first started thinking about business education for designers, actually it came from the fact that I was talking to a fellow business designer, and we talked about design thinking and how design thinking is hyped, etc., etc., and like nobody talks about business thinking. And that was kind of the trigger for me, like, oh, business thinking, interesting. So if I just switch and if like, because what I do and a lot of design agencies do is they teach businesses how to use design, right? And that
mhm.
was the realization for me that the flip side is completely empty, right? Nobody's doing it.
Ah,
So like looking for those categories that you can own in the business sense.
wow. I did not realize this, but maybe a couple of months in, I realized that most of the UX podcasts were about basic UX, like how to do UX, how to do UI and stuff. But like there was not much in design entrepreneurship. Like meaning like interviewing people who are doing their own side hustles or doing some ventures related to design. So I did not know it back then, but now I can see that there's not that many doing it. So that's when I knew that, okay, this is a niche that I need to just keep going on, where I interview people like you who are doing their own venture in design and what was their journey like.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah, there's definitely a niche here.
So I just want to say, man, how can people contact you or follow you?
So one way to follow us is to just maybe reach out to us or follow us on LinkedIn. I think we are most active there. So if you just type in d.MBA into the LinkedIn search, you should find us. Then I also most active on LinkedIn. So if you just type in my name, so AlenFaljic, you're gonna find me, and you can follow me there. And apart from that, you can also visit, our website, d.mba. It's a single letter domain name, so some people get confused by that. So it's basically www.d.mba. So we were very lucky to get that domain name. I was actually tracking it for some time, and then one day, for some reason, it was just available. So yeah, that was a very lucky coincidence. Yeah, so you can also find us there. There is a 7-day mini MBA email course that we have. So if you're interested to learn more about business, you can also sign up for that and get in your email inbox a few business tools that you can use in your work. But also, if you have more questions about the MBA, I think the easiest way is to just reach out to us at hello@d.mba.
Awesome. I'll include all those links in the show notes. But once again, thank you, Alen, so much for coming on the show, man. It's been a blast.
Yeah, I enjoyed the conversation. So thanks a lot for having me.